When we got to the airport, we went to rent the car. We tried to be as efficient as possible. Sarah was going to get the luggage, right? I was going to, rent the car and get it started, to get out as fast as possible. And of course, I get to the desk and realize, as they're looking at my driver's license, that my driver's license is expired. Ugh. I knew it was too. I just totally forgot and didn't update it. So we get there, and I'm thinking, oh, what are we going to do? So I go on my phone, and I update it right there on my phone, right? You can do that with Service Ontario, right? It's amazing, amazing, amazing place. So update this thing. I go and show them, listen, it's updated. There you go. Now you can rent me the car. They're like, no, it doesn't list the new expiry date on it. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure the expiry date is more than 3 days from now when I return the car. I was really not working that hard at being sanctified in that moment. Anyway, long story short, they had to rent the car to my wife, which she is really kind of, I think, enjoying having that control, being the one driving and driving me around. And, I'm doing my best to try to let her do that and so on. And she was able to go and visit Value Village, which is what she loves to do, right? So she did that. Well, this morning, as we were coming here, we were a bit late, because as we were getting into the car, we saw a big kind of gash along the side of the car. Yes, so, and right as we were getting ready to leave, the couple who were belonging to the car that rubbed against our car were right there, and you could clearly see on their front bumper, it was bearing the paint of our car on the side. So, anyway, we worked through all of that. Long story short, though, the cool thing is this goes on Sarah's name, right? There's a silver lining to every cloud. And so now this will be on Sarah's name, on Sarah's record, right? So I just thought that was awesome. So anyway, it's really good to be here. We have a lot of shared history with you guys, and every time we get together, it's very nostalgic. Just to see Phil and Beth and hang out with you guys, it was really, really cool to see your family. It's just amazing, and it brings back so many memories of us working together. Phil and I go way back to Bible college together and starting a church in Mississauga, Ontario, and then these guys coming out here. Just hanging out with Isaac yesterday. We were sorry that Amber wasn't feeling well, but we got to hang out with Isaac, and he played tour guide for us and drove us around Vancouver. It's actually my wife's first time here in BC, so it was pretty nice to, she thinks it's pretty good, actually. Yeah, she's pretty outdoorsy, so I think she was giving some points to the Vancouverites there during the little quiz. So, well, we appreciate you guys a lot. You really are family to us, and I know we don't get to see each other a lot, but we're going to keep working at having some of our staff come out here and see you guys, and having some of you guys come and visit us. And we're putting a summit together for this summer, and we're going to try to bring a bunch of our people out here just to work with you guys as you kind of kick off for the fall and stuff. So. And just hang out together and spend some time and get to know each other better. It's really important. So we're going to continue on in the series that you guys have been doing along with us, and we've been preparing it together, and it was really fun to work with Isaac and our creative team in just kind of putting this series together. So it's been fun. Hope that you're enjoying it. We're going to continue today with rule number 6. So let's take a second and pray, and then we'll jump into that. Father, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really great to be here and just to have a chance to be with family who love you, who know you, who love your word. Thank you for our fellowship and for the high value for your word that we hold. And I pray this morning as we open it and we look at it and we look particularly at the words of Jesus, these divine instructions, that we would really open our minds and hearts and recognize the wisdom that is being shared with us, and that we would just assimilate that knowledge and that truth into our hearts and into our lives, that you would make us better people, and that people would see the difference that you've made in our lives so that we can draw glory to you. That's what it's all about. So bless our study here this morning, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. The fall is flying by. Next weekend is Halloween weekend already, and then it's onward toward Christmas, right? Can you believe it? It's just moving really fast, really fast. You guys got an extended fall here, it feels like, in Vancouver with some nice sunshine, so that's pretty cool. How many of you are preparing for Christmas already? Let's just be honest. Come on, where are you people that plan way ahead, right? Yeah, there's quite a few of you. I have to be honest with you, I don't like planning too far ahead with Christmas. For me, December 1st is that's when you're allowed to start listening to Christmas music. How many of you would agree with me on that? Okay. How many of you say, nah, forget you, I like playing Christmas music anytime I want. Yeah, it's about an even split. Everywhere I go, it's kind of like that, and my wife and I are kind of split on this as well. I don't like starting Christmas music till December 1st. Otherwise, it's like this never-ending sort of season to me. I do like certain Christmas movies, and I like to watch those most Christmases. I like to take them in. It's a Wonderful Life. It's one of my favorites. I love watching that. Elf, yes. Right? Isn't Elf great? Yes, it's a great movie. Maybe not quite as meaningful as It's a Wonderful Life, but... And then another one that I really like is Dickens' Christmas Carol. And I'm due to rewatch this one, actually, and I have to be honest, I like all the different versions of it. I like the 1951 version with Alistair Sim. You can see his picture here. Let's put him up. There's Scrooge, right? That's a very Scroogey looking face. I like the one by Disney with Scrooge McDuck when I was a kid. Anyone remember this one? Yeah, that's a good one. And I even like the 2009 Jim Carrey version. In fact, it might be my new favorite. I love this one. And how they kind of took Jim Carrey's look and turned it into an animation. I thought it was really, really well done and really drives the point home. We usually use this story to speak about the sin of greed, right? That's kind of what we use it for, with Ebenezer Scrooge being the protagonist of the story. But I think there are other angles to this story. Scrooge was, according to Dickens, I'll quote him, he says, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. In another place, he goes on to say that, Scrooge says, that the poor should avail themselves of the treadmill or the workhouses, or else die to reduce the surplus population. This was what Scrooge said. So he probably didn't come out that clearly in the Scrooge McDuck version and say that, but this was, if you actually read Dickens' story, the way that he spoke. So he was more than just an old miser. He was hateful, and he was negative, and he was critical of the world around him as well. After feeling obliged to allow Bob Cratchit, his employee, to have Christmas Day off with his family, Scrooge was visited by three spirits. You know the story. On that Christmas Eve, Scrooge was given an amazing gift, one that did not immediately appear to be a gift, but it really was. It was the gift of what I call forced introspection, right? He had a chance to see himself in a new way. In succession, the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future allow Ebenezer Scrooge to see himself as he really is, and then the end result of the trajectory that he's on. What's going to happen if he does not change the path that he's on? And it was actually an amazing gift. The final ghost silently, without words, reveals scenes of the death of a disliked man whose funeral is attended by local businessmen only on the condition that lunch is provided. If you remember the story. That's a bit of a jab, isn't it? When he asks the spirit to show a single person who feels emotion over his death, he is only given the pleasure of a poor couple who rejoice at his death because it gives them more time to put their finances in order. And when Scrooge jadedly asks if anyone cares anywhere about anyone's death, the ghost then shows him Bob Cratchit and his family mourning the death of their son, Tiny Tim. Finally, the spirit allows Scrooge to see a neglected grave with a tombstone bearing Scrooge's own name on it, Ebenezer Scrooge. Sobbing, Scrooge pledges to change his ways. And he gets up the next day, and we know the rest of that story. Well, it's a classic story. Maybe you haven't given it much thought, but we really don't see very many movies like this anymore. We really don't. Movies like A Christmas Carol or It's a Wonderful Life, they do an amazing job at challenging us to be more introspective. And I really don't see that many movies that do that anymore, that really kind of dig into our hearts and see what's going on and ask us to maybe think about how we could change. These movies tell us to look inside rather than to complain about the condition of the world around us. And I think, for one, I think that we could use more movies like that. Anyone else agree? Yeah, I think that we could use more of those. And so today's rule goes along with this idea. It is rule number 6, examine yourself before you criticize the world. And I think that this is a timely one for today's culture. I really do. It's interesting, of all the rules that we've identified from the Sermon on the Mount, today's rule actually sounds the most like one that Jordan Peterson wrote in his first book. It is actually, rule number 6 as well in his first book, and his wording for it was, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. That's the way he worded it in his book. And it's very closely related, if you check it out, it's very closely related to the teaching of Christ, which I think is an example of how Jesus' teaching has really influenced a lot of minds in the world, especially in the Western world, some very great minds, and I think often without them even realizing it, without even knowing where these thoughts have come from, that they actually go back to Jesus, that he was the one that seeded those thoughts. Peterson has some refreshing perspective on this subject. Let me read a little bit for you. You can see it here on the board next to me. He says, are there things that you could do, that you know that you could do, that would make things around you better? He's a psychologist, right? A clinical psychologist. He asks these kinds of questions to his clients. Have you cleaned up your life? If the answer is no, here's something to try. Start to stop doing what you know to be wrong. Start stopping today. Don't waste time questioning how you know that what you're doing is wrong if you are certain that it is. He goes on in another passage to say, life is short, and you don't have time to figure everything out on your own. The wisdom of the past was hard-earned, and your dead ancestors may have something useful to tell you. Don't blame capitalism, the radical left, or the iniquity of your enemies. Don't reorganize the state until you've ordered your own experience. Have some humility. If you cannot bring peace to your own household, how do you dare try to rule a city? That actually sounds like some advice that Paul even gave to leaders in the church, doesn't it? It's interesting. You know, in a world where people are so quick to identify with the latest causes and then attack anyone who differs in opinion, is anyone else noticing how much this is going on? The recommendation to examine yourself, it is actually really conspicuous. When someone says, hey, look inward, examine yourself, everyone's like, what? Really? What a concept, right? Because we're just in a world where everybody is just attacking one another. As I said, I think Peterson's views on this may rest more on Jesus' teaching than he even realizes. And Jesus is the one that we're interested in learning from in this series. And so let's jump in and take a look. If you have your Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 7. I'll show the verses up here, and let's jump in. Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, Jesus says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all of the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Well, the word for judge here in Greek is the word krino. It has the basic idea of just deciding what is right or wrong, but in the way that Jesus is using it here, it also carries this idea of condemnation. And if you dig into this, you really see that's what Jesus is driving at here. When he says don't judge, he's talking about that attitude of condemnation. In many other places, believers are actually told to be discerning, and of course, we understand that that's important. It's an important thing for Christians to discern what is good or bad in every circumstance. We should know what we believe to be right or good. It's having this attitude of condemnation that Jesus is warning us against. It's an attitude that is really fed by our sinful nature that always wants to make us look better than the next guy, right? We just want to look a little better than that person next to us. And that's what we see here in Jesus' illustration. We want to look morally superior, so we point out the flaws in the way that other people are acting, right? We have this big plank in our own eye, but we want to point out the speck in somebody else's eye. This is our sinful human nature. Isaac was telling me, Pastor Isaac said that earlier this week he was opening the dishwasher, and a chopstick caught just the wrong way and flew out and hit him right there, right next to his eye. That could have been really bad. But it would have been an amazing illustration, Isaac, if I could have got you up here today, literally with that chopstick, like sticking out of your eye. That would have been next level sermon illustration. Yeah, I know, right? Like you never waste any illustration. But anyway, he'll tell you more about that maybe at another point. Now, it's not that we should never come alongside someone and advise them in regard to the way that they're living or correct them. In fact, we should. Jesus even says that here. He says if we do the things right, we will, quote, see clearly to remove the speck from our brother's eye. So he's not saying we never do this. He's just saying that you need to do this in the right way. But he tells us to start by removing the plank from our own eye first, and that's really important. If we don't, he says we're just living in hypocrisy. So Jesus is teaching his followers to be people, listen to these words, of self-reflection and of self-examination. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you should be a person of self-reflection and self-examination. This was very important to Jesus. He's teaching us to be people who constantly look inward at our own hearts and our egos. He's teaching us to be people who look in the mirror. His brother James talked about that, right? People who are just as eager to change themselves as they are the world around them. And that's not the tendency that we see in the world today. Now, Pastor Isaac is going to speak more directly on the theme of judging in week 10, so that's coming up, and I don't want to steal his thunder. There's lots of thunder to go around, though, right, when we get to Jesus' teaching. But for today, what I want to do is I want you of this attitude of superiority, and I want you to see how it's really opposite of what Jesus taught. You know, even in this passage of the Beatitudes that we started with here in this Sermon on the Mount, he says, blessed are the meek, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. The attitude that he is describing is the exact opposite of this attitude of being judgmental and of criticizing the world. Jesus demonstrated over and over again that he is quick to come alongside those who are humble and who are broken, but for people who are not, what do we see, right? That he resists them. He is far from those who are proud and living in denial. And that's one of the hallmarks of modern morality. There's a lot of denial going on. Let's talk a little bit about the problem of modern morality. I don't know if you've given it much thought. Morality has changed a lot in North America over the past generation or so. When it comes to morality, the Bible teaches us to start with ourselves. This is a noted, difference between the world's morality of today and what the Bible teaches. With the decline, I think, of Christian influence, this generation has kind of lost that reflex of starting with ourselves as it relates to morality. We no longer see the starting point of morality as our own commitment to personal integrity, to personal purity. Morality has become mostly external. Have you noticed this? This is how we like our morality today. It's all out there somewhere. It's what you're doing for the planet. It's what you're doing for the environment. It's these macro social issues that people haven't been able to figure out for many, many generations, but we're gonna put those things out there. This is the morality that we're going after today. And I want to caution you because it's really easy to fall into the trap of becoming a hypocritical critic. We see a lot of these today. Someone who has all of the answers to the world's problems, but who can't control their own impulses. There's a lot of people like that today. It's everywhere on social media, especially. People who are very smarmy and self-righteous, calling out anyone who doesn't kind of keep in step with the latest social cause. The internet actually gives everyone a voice, but it doesn't create accountability for people who like to be vocal. You notice that? When it comes to the internet and social media, we don't get the luxury of analyzing their lives to see if these people are even credible to be talking about the things that they're speaking about. They have solutions for the world's biggest problems, but who knows if they even, are able to make their own bed in the morning. We don't know in most situations. Many of today's modern Pharisees are online. They hide behind the internet like Pharisees used to hide behind their religious clothing and their religious rituals, right? Create this little distance, safe distance. This is what people do today with the internet. Jesus really had no tolerance for that kind of religious superiority. I see these things that are going on, and I think to myself very often, again, trying not to be judgmental, but trying to be discerning. I wonder, how many people fight for sexual freedom because they like to be sexually promiscuous? It's the thought that goes through my head. How many people like to fight for a woman's right to choose because maybe they got an abortion when they were younger, or they, pushed their girlfriend to get one? You ever wonder maybe that could be happening? How many people make large gifts to charity because they have gotten rich dishonestly? I actually, before Pastor Mitch passed away at our church, I was with him at the hospital, and we were sitting in the new wing of the hospital. He was telling me how the donor for that wing of the hospital was part of the mafia. He knew him. He actually, of course, Pastor Mitch actually dated the girl that was, anyways, the whole story. Only Pastor Mitch. How many people are environmental zealots because they want to distract from the fact that they're polluting their own bodies on a daily basis? I think about those things, and I think there's probably a lot of deflection going on, distraction. Examine yourself before you criticize the world. This is what Jesus taught. Now note, Jesus taught that the biggest problem, we'll put this up here so you can see it. Jesus taught that the biggest problem is not everything that's going on out there. It's what's going on in here, right? And this is the starting point for followers of Jesus. This is where we have to get to. It's not everything that's going on out there. Those are big problems, but they're not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is what's going on in here. And this is a foundational teaching that has huge implications for the way that Jesus' followers approach life. Once you begin to see your own sinful heart as the biggest problem, then good things can start to happen. It's small, and it starts at one spot, but it has the potential to really change things. Jesus actually gave his followers some really practical advice to help keep our sinful hearts in check. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of our time on that we have here this morning doing. Just 2 points. Here's the first one. The advice that Jesus gave was to look inward before you look outward. And if you have your notes there, you can fill it in. Okay? Look inward before you look outward. That's the point of remove the plank from your own eye before removing the speck from someone else's, right? Look inward first. Jesus repeated this idea in many different times and in many different ways. In fact, if we jump ahead in the book of Matthew to chapter 23, look at what he says. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside will also be clean." He goes on, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and full of wickedness." You see, the tendency to criticize the world while ignoring one's own issues is nothing new. It's been going on for centuries. It will continue to go on. And this section is not in the Sermon on the Mount, but it was a repeated teaching that Jesus gave. You can go over in Luke chapter 11. You can see the exact same story being told. This was something Jesus repeated very often. And so he had a lot of stories that dealt with this same concept. This passage is even more graphic than the Matthew 7 passage in highlighting the need to look inward first. And I love how it uses two really key metaphors, and I don't know if you noticed them. The first one in the first half is dirt, and in the second half, it's death. All right, so he's going to use two metaphors here to drive this home and to make this really palpable. As it relates to dirt, well, he says clean the inside of the cup first. No one wants to drink from an unwashed cup. Now, how many of you, let's just be honest, how many of you, you're in the kitchen, there's a dirty cup there, you need a drink of water, whatever, you pick up the dirty cup and you just drink from it, and you pour water in it and do it. Some people do. How many of you do that? Really? A bunch of germaphobes here, right? Yeah, okay, all right. How many of you rather you're going to look for a clean cup before you get yourself some water? All right, okay. I think that's the norm, right? Sorry, Isaac, you're on your own for that one. Of rinsing well, that's what moms do because they don't want to, load up that dishwasher any more than they have to, right? So, I remember when I was first meeting Sarah, and she was part of a Plymouth Brethren church in Quebec. And in their tradition, every Sunday you had bread, communion, bread and cup. And so we would gather. It would be in a room about this size, but it would be in a circle. And everyone facing inward, and you'd have the table in the middle. And there you would have bread that you would pass around, and you would tear the bread off. But then also there was a cup, one cup. And I remember thinking, oh, this is the nastiest religious experience I've ever had. Because they literally would pass this cup around, and everyone drinks from it, including like the old ladies with the lipstick on and everything. I was going crazy. And then this cup is coming around, right? And you could see, actually, you learned over time that some people even planned where they were sitting in relation to where they knew the cup was going to be passed. Very shortly after that, they went to the little individual cups, and I was like, yes, they've caught up with modern society, right? It's actually more biblical, right? When you read Jesus, they had one cup, right? Well, I don't care about whose hands have touched the outside of the cup that I'm drinking from. Don't care, right? I'm much more interested on what is floating on the inside of the cup, right? Trying to make this as visceral as I can, and I'm succeeding, apparently, okay? Yes. Jesus is trying to tap into our emotional side here. This is literally the reaction he's going for. He's talking about dirt. Now he's going to talk about death. He talks about whitewashed tombs that look really nice on the outside, but inside they're full of dead bones, rotten bones, rotting flesh and bodies. And Jesus is using the disgusting aspects of death and decay to show the condition of these Pharisees' hearts. And they were catching it. They were smart enough to catch this. You know, I believe, and I teach very often, that everything in the physical world reflects something of greater reality in the spiritual realm. Think about it. If God is all wise and he's creating this world, what is he going to base that on? He's going to base it on things that are spiritually real in the spiritual realm. And so everything that we see here, it reflects something. You even see that of the tabernacle. When you study that out in Hebrews, it talks about these are shadows of other things that are of greater meaning. And so I think God does that with everything in life. So God made physical death and decay to be ugly. He made it to be smelly. He made it to be gross because he wanted us to understand spiritual death in that way. He wanted us to associate the disgustingness of spiritual death with the disgustingness of physical death and decay. So this is all intentional on God's part. Pride is sin. It is spiritual death. When you're full of pride, you are full of death. You're full of rot. This is what Jesus is teaching. Now, in case you haven't caught it, Jesus had a real issue with pride. Let's talk about pride and humility here. It's at the heart of many of these rules that we've been teaching. Last week, Pastor Isaac spoke on treating every person with the utmost dignity. Rule number 5, right? Rule 5 is mostly about humility, right? We don't treat other people with dignity because we think that we're better than them, right? So it's about pride. Today in Rule 6, we see that a lack of humility also causes us to see the problems in everyone else and not in ourselves. So that also is pride. And if you go back to week number 2, rule number 2, do good in a way that exalts God, not yourself. What's that about? Also about pride. So you have to kind of back up and look at all of these rules and say, are there even some bigger themes that are going on? Pride and humility. It's a huge theme in everything that Jesus taught. Jesus had a real big issue with pride. Most Christians who have studied the Bible for a while would agree that pride is the greatest sin. Most of you would agree with that, right? We say that a lot. Pride is the greatest sin. If that's true, I guess that we could also safely say that humility is the greatest virtue. A virtue that we cannot champion enough. And I want to encourage you parents particularly. Guys, teaching kids humility is one of your biggest jobs, if not your biggest job. You say, well, teaching them about God is the biggest job. Yes, but even the way the Bible frames that, you understand what it says, right? It says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So humility goes right together with that. You have to teach your kids to be humble. Kids need to see that God is the ultimate authority, that he has instituted other authorities, including parents, right? And that children are under those authorities. Our schools are corrupting our kids today by teaching them that they are their own authority. It's a shame. They're being taught about everything that they deserve, right? Little kids, I deserve this. I'm entitled to this. And so it makes them entitled. It makes them rotten to the core because that's what pride is. It's spiritual death. It's spiritual rot. Many of them are growing up a lot like these Pharisees. They're very skilled at virtue signaling. Have you noticed this? Before my youngest son graduated the last number of years in school, he was telling me that he would come home and he began to develop this reflex where anytime somebody said something that was just a little off, they'd go, racist, right? Sexist, ageist. Like they're literally being taught this in school to call everything out, like little Pharisees, just like name everything. Now, I'm not saying that there's not times where you need to be able to identify those things and call it out, but just the way that they're being taught, almost like militantly to do these things. Basically, they're learning to call other people out, and this is the problem when it's being done in this way and not getting to the heart. It's really teaching them to call other people out so they look better than them. And this is what you see. There's a lot of pride that can get wrapped up in that. At Renew, I taught in week 2 that 2 new words have been added to the dictionary over the last decade. These are a couple of words that maybe you've seen now. Here we go. Virtue signaling and humble brag. You know these ones? Yeah. Virtue signaling, of course, is expressing your opinions about social or political issues in public in order to show other people that you're on the right side, that you're a good person, right? A lot of people do this today. Just take note, everybody. I'm on the right side here. It's moral grandstanding. It's like saying, look at me, I'm one of the good ones. People love to do this today. The humble brag is a seemingly modest, self-critical, or casual statement that is meant to draw attention to one's admirable or impressive qualities or achievements. And a lot of people are good at this. It's kind of an art form. And some are better at it than others. Joe Jonas isn't that good. Take a look at one of the things that he posted on Twitter. Totally walked down the wrong escalator at the airport from the flashes of the cameras. Go me. So he's self-deprecating, go me, I'm such an idiot. But he wants everybody to know that there were tons of people taking pictures of him at the airport, right? This is the humble brag. And these are all over the place. Everybody wants to look humble, but make sure you know how great they are. Well, humble brags just smell a little bit off, don't they? You read that and you go, oh yeah, there's pride in here, because it's like rot, right? It's like when you pick something up out of the fridge that you can't remember the last time you bought that thing, and you just go, yeah, no, gonna pass on that. Everyone is so concerned about the outside of the cup, about the outward image. Jesus was more interested in what's floating inside the cup. Here's the second thing that Jesus teaches us that will help us in this. He says, do your good deeds in secret if that's what it takes to keep your heart in the right place. Matthew chapter 6, let's read it. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received the reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. You know, the Pharisees were so bad back in Jesus' day that they literally blew trumpets when they were doing their acts of righteousness. And they were giving their gifts, right? Giving their money. They would literally blow trumpets to draw people's attention to it. That's not that different, right, from what we're seeing today. Like, the human heart has not changed. Now, notice here, Jesus doesn't say to never allow your righteous acts to be seen. We already saw earlier in the series that we are told that we are like a city on a hill that cannot be hidden, and that we are to allow people to see our good deeds so that they will glorify our Father in heaven. So it is good for people to see our good deeds. But he's talking here about motive. He says, do not practice your righteousness in front of others in order to be seen by them. What is your heart motive in it? This is the question. Whose glory are you going after? Is it yours or is it really God's? And if you can't do things with a selfless motive, then his advice here is just to keep it totally private. And maybe you're at this stage in your life. Maybe you really struggle with this. You're like, I want to do these good things, and I know that it's good, but I find that I just get all wrapped up in my own glory when it comes to this. Jesus has some very practical advice for you. Just start doing stuff that's totally in private, that only you and God know about. That's a real practical thing that you can do. Matthew 6, verses 5 and 6 says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. You know, for the Pharisees, everything was about pride. Everything. It was all about pride. They even needed people to see them praying. Like, no religious act could be wasted, right? Don't waste a religious act. Make sure that people see you doing it. That was the mentality that they had. Well, maybe you need to start living in a way that doesn't give you that opportunity to glorify yourself. Maybe you need to start serving in a ministry where no one notices, right? Maybe you need to start serving people that really can't brag on you very much. Maybe you need to find like a special needs kid and just pour your life into them. How about that? Maybe that would be Jesus' advice if you really struggle with that. I remember when I was a teenager, I was invited to help out with our Awana program. Do you guys run Awana here? You did, eh? We used to at one point, too. It's a great program. I was 13 at the time. And I was asked to be a teacher in it, and I was actually teaching the kids that were like 11 and 12. So they were close in my age. But this was happening on Friday nights in our town, and we actually rented space in the arena, upstairs in the arena on Friday night. And so I committed to it, but then every Friday night now I'm like having to teach Awana. Like all my friends are doing other stuff. I'm seeing a lot of them coming in and out of the arena because it's a place where people go. And I was like there with these kids every Friday. And I did that from the age of 13 to 17. And I remember there were so many times when I was just like, ugh, why did I do this? Why did I choose to do this? But it was really good for my heart, I have to say. It was really good. It really helped to develop a care for the right things and the things that matter. And I thank God a lot for that. Even today, there are times where you just want to do something and to be seen for it, for people to know about it. And I think back to that and think that was a good lesson. You know, I want to tie all of this together as we wrap it up. We got other things to get to here this morning. Examine yourself before you criticize the world. The world has a lot of problems. There is a lot to criticize. That's not the issue. There's a lot to criticize. Our job isn't to judge, but there are times when wrong actions and systems need to be called out, when they will need to be critiqued. And I hope that God will actually use us. I hope that He will use the church to speak into those things in the right ways. But Jesus is saying here that until you learn to have a proper perspective of yourself, your place under God's authority, under the other authorities that He's established, until you see how your own sinfulness is contributing to the problems in the world, until you recognize your own shortcomings and you begin to address those, that maybe you just want to tread lightly, right? I think that's Jesus' advice. King David had a lot of flaws. He learned the hard way the importance of examining himself, and I'll leave you with his own words. Look at what it says in Psalm 139. In fact, why don't we read it together? Let's read it. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Rule number 6, examine yourself before you criticize the world. Let's pray.